So here's the challenge when we listen. We're just not built as human beings to listen, right? Like when it comes down to actively listening, we learn things like paraphrase, pay attention, repeat. But the problem is our brain is moving so fast that we're not even really retaining anything. That comes back to the definition or to the stat of people retain about 20% from what they hear. Now, part of the reason is there's 4 quadrants of listening. When we listen to people, we listen to them in 1 of 4 ways. And in fact, these are the do-nots of listening, but unfortunately, we can't help ourselves. Now, where are the critical parents in the room? Tell me if this ever happens to you, when people are like maybe telling you the story. They're telling you the story and why it didn't work out and what the problem was and what the issue was or why they can't make it. When you're listening to them, through what we call the critical parents' ears, which are the ears of judgment. As people are telling you the story, we are just judging and criticizing everything that they say. Right? Has this ever happened to you? Not just you two, right? But as people are talking, I mean, it's so hard. Maybe your spouse comes home, right? You've had a really rough day, been a long day. You've been at like the events all weekend and you're like, hey, and they're like, oh my God, I had such a rough day. And you're like, you had a rough day. You see, the challenge with us is as people are talking, if we're not careful, we're taking that critical parent approach and we're judging their position, their decision, their actions, their thoughts. In fact, we just might be judging them in their entirety. I learned this a long time ago, many years ago, when my wife came home and she said, babe, the car is making, I said, what'd you do? She's like, what? I'm like, cars don't make funny noises. You must have done something. She's like, you're a lunatic. She's like, the car's making a funny noise. Can you look at it? I said, fine, I'll go look at it. I'm a pretty handy guy. All right, go investigate the situation. Aha, discovered the issue. All right, she's ripped the exhaust clean off. And I know because I've seen the way she drives. And she does this stupid stuff. And she drives over corners and she pulls over mediums and she ripped the exhaust off. So I walked inside and I said, you ripped the exhaust off. Like, no, I didn't. I'm like, nah, exhausts don't just fall off. Anyway, we take the car to Audi. I say, Audi, I'm very concerned. It's a new car. It's a lemon. The exhaust is falling off. They say, sir, that's impossible, but let's investigate. She calls me back. She says, sir, the exhaust didn't fall off. 1, because it's 1 piece of metal. It's not different components. And 2, someone's come in, they sawed off the exhaust and they stole it. And I now realize that I was a little quick to jump to conclusions and judgments when my wife was beginning to tell me about the fact that the car makes a noise. Now, some of you don't judge people, right? And you got to be careful because sometimes it's not just the words that you use when you judge people, it's the facial expressions. Everything that I'm saying, you're sort of criticizing and sort of shooting down. Now, the next type of way we listen is we listen through the ears of what we call minimizing. People coming and telling you about their problems. I'm having such a rough day, and you say, don't worry about it. Kid loses a soccer game, you go, don't worry about it, just a game. Or someone gets fired, you say, don't worry. Okay. Someone breaks up, don't worry about it. All right, you'll find true love one day. That wasn't meant to be. You see, what we tend to do as people when we're minimizing is in our exercise and our effort to take that pain away, we end up minimizing them and their entire world. People do this at work. They come up and they're frantic. Oh my God. And you're like, chill, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Someone loses a toe. Don't worry about it. You got 9 more. Kids failing in school. Don't worry about it. Your other one's a genius. I'm having a rough time at work. It's okay. Tomorrow's a new day. I got denied on the promotion. Oh, that's okay. You'll get it next time. You see, in our exercise to make people feel better, if we're not careful, we're minimizing their entire world. The next is what we call, gentlemen, we call you mechanics, and ladies, we call you advice monsters. So someone begins to tell you their problem. They're like, I'm having a rough. You're like, here's what you should do. Solutioning. All right. You know why? Because it feels really good to give people advice. I once said this in an interview. I said, giving people advice is a narcissistic trait. And they went, whoa, what do you mean? And I said, well, think about this. How many times are you actually giving advice from their position? And take that one step further. How good do you feel when you gave them the advice, they did the thing, and they come back to you and they go, you know what? I did the thing that you told me to do, and I feel, and that worked. And you go, it absolutely did. I am that good. All right. That is the advice I give. Right. Sometimes you do this with your significant others. They come home, I'm having a rough day. Here's what you got to do. Step 1, right? My wife actually called me yesterday. She got an offer and she's not sure. And I was tired and I just missed the cue. And I'm like, here's what you got to do. It ended up in a little bit of an argument. And it ended up with, but that's what I just said. And she's like, well, I didn't hear you say that. So the point of it all, sometimes we're too quick to give this advice and we're too quick to problem solve. Here's the danger at work when you problem solve. is you teach people to rely upon you to tell them what to do each and every single time. Dan Martell talks about the 1-3-1 rule. I think I mentioned on day one. Someone comes to you with a problem. At work, very specifically. I don't know if you should do this with your spouse, but you could definitely do it with your kids, by the way. Maybe not your spouse, but with your kids. Team member comes and says, parent or leader, I have an issue. You say, great. Describe that one issue. Then you ask them this very specific question. What are your 3 recommendations for dealing with that issue? And you go, well, I guess we can do this and we can do that, or we can do this, or they give you their recommendation. And then you say, and the 1-3-1 rule, out of the 3 recommendations, which is the one you feel most confident about? Keywords, which one do you feel most confident about? I really like number 2. Go for it, run. And if it doesn't work, right, and they come back, oh, it doesn't work. Okay, what are your 3 recommendations now? Right, you got that feedback loop. Okay, you tried it, didn't work. Now, listen, if someone is in a building and it's on fire and they're like, oh, way to go. I wouldn't say, well, how do you feel? And what recommendations do you have, right? And is the temperature getting warm? At that point, you might just direct them out the building, right? That's why we all have the fire marshal duty every once in a while, because we panic in the moment. So we just need to be directed. Gentlemen, stop fixing shit. You don't always have an answer for stuff. But again, feels good. We're very mechanical in some things. And if you are more of the adult personality, we sometimes miss that opportunity just to hear and listen because we're so busy fixing, advising, guiding, telling. Now, the final stage of how we listen is we listen through the ears of interruption. I had a buddy who once came over, hanging out in the backyard, having a rough time at work. And he says, so how's it going? And I begin to tell him. His name was Ryan. Ryan, oh man, thank you, man. Glad you asked me that question. A little rough, having some tough times in business and at work and stuff. He says, oh my God, me too. And he begins to take over the whole conversation. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, anyway, a few minutes later, he's like, but go on. I was like, thank you. Begins to tell. He's like, oh my God, me too. And that's why we call the me tooer, right? The person that is always interrupting you. Me. I want to jump in. I want to respond. I want to answer. I want to add. So when we listen, we tend to listen out of one of these 4 quadrants. Now we do all of them in different relationships with different people, with different situations. We do all of them. I've done this as a leader. Someone's walking in and telling me, specifically with some of the other trainers, how'd the room go today? How did you deliver in class? Oh, I had a little bit of a tough time with this guy, Joe. Oh, fuck. There's this instant sort of judgment that comes over me when I'm like, you did something wrong. I got to hold back on that. Team member rolls in with a problem. I got to be very careful about this as a coach sometimes. Like my role is to sometimes give advice and to problem solve. But if you're too quick telling people what to do, they don't pick it up themselves. So slowing down a little bit. I did this with my buddy when he got a divorce. He's like, I got a divorce. I was like, here's what you should do. He did not take well to the advice. And the minimizing, I think we do the minimizing. It's this sort of blanket thing that we do as people. Now, the danger when doing any of these things, we're not actually in the position of receiving and hearing. We're in the position of firing responses as quickly as we can. And why I share this with you now is when you're with your partners and your partner is going through their communication guide. Catch yourself. How many times are you judging them? Oh, it's not such a big deal. I don't know why you're so sensitive about this thing. Well, their objective. Oh, that's a shitty objective. Catch yourself. Minimize when they're telling you the story and they're like, here's my challenge. Don't say things like, oh my God, I understand. That sucks. That's so bad. Don't worry. Because what you're doing is interrupting them. Your whole idea of problem solving, you're not here to problem solve for them. Stop giving them the answers. Well, here's what you should do this time. Here's what you should do next time. And usually, again, we interrupt through one of those 3 styles. Talk a little bit about adult-based questions. First, what do we ultimately want to achieve from this interaction? So if I could wave a magical wand and I could walk out with an outcome, what is that? We want to think about, again, if I go have this conversation, if we meet these priorities, if we get this thing happening, what is the outcome I'm looking for? Number 2, how is this going to improve things moving forward? What do I ultimately want to achieve? And how is this going to improve things in the future? And then the opposite to that, what are the consequences of me not achieving that? In my opinion and experience, the more I've worked with objectives, the more I found that they really boil down to 2 things: commitment and alignment. All objectives, I'm either trying to get the person to commit to doing something or trying to get aligned so we're on the same pace and we're moving in the same direction. They're either both of those factors in there or it's one or the other. Objectives are never to express my feelings or to appreciate. I tell a story about my wife. She had this guy, Daniel, that worked for her. She was the head of marketing. She would come home and she'd go, freaking Daniel. Right? Now, Daniel was by definition a defensive, angry child. Everything was a big deal.